Good afternoon, everyone. First, a delight and a big thank you on behalf of WRI India for all of you to have joined us at this launch of our working paper on a roadmap for scaling trees outside forests in India, and our learnings really from the policy incentives that have been introduced in 6 different states. So this is what the paper is all about. Just by way of a background, I mean, all of us know that India has made a number of very bold and I think very generous commitments during the COP26 meeting in Glasgow last. While our net zero commitments are for 2070, I think the big thing that India has done is put fairly ambitious commitments and generous commitments even for 2030. It's something unique. Most other countries who've got a 2050, 2060 target for net zero do not have these kinds of interim targets, which would add credibility to whatever they've committed in the longer term. So I think unique, India is unique in this. Now, when we talk about net zero, there is one side of it is reducing the emissions, but the other side is taking away from the emissions. So the trees become very important when it comes to pulling away from the emissions, absorbing some of these emissions. That's why trees are very important, and trees are not limited to only forests. The effort is how do you have more tree cover coming outside forests also. Now, what kind of policy incentives have been introduced in different states, how they work, where it has worked well, where it has not worked as well, what improvements can be made. I think that is the objective of this paper, whether learnings from these 6 states and their policy initiatives would help other states to do something similar. That really is the objective of this paper. And again, once again, a big welcome to you. So with these few opening remarks, what I would like to do is request our chief guest today, Dr. Rajiv Kumar, to sort of help with to digitally launch this paper. But before we do that, Dr. Rajiv Kumar really doesn't need an introduction as being the vice chairman of the NITI Aayog. That he's very well known across the country. But what I thought I would do is take a minute or so to introduce how he got there. His stellar career that he had before he got here. He started his career with ICRIER as a researcher. This was 1977 to 1982. He was as a researcher in ICRIER, but then became its director and CEO from 2006 onwards for about 5 years. He has been a professor at the Indian Institute of Foreign Trade. He has been a senior fellow at the Center for Policy Research, the CPR, as we all know it. He was the head of the Pahle India Foundation, which is a non-profit that he founded in 2013. Now, within the government system, he was the economic advisor to the Department of Economic. This was from 1991 to 1995. He was also a senior consultant with the Bureau of Industrial Costs and Prices from 1989 to 1991. So this is the government. Earlier, I spoke about think tanks. And going beyond that, he's worked for 10 years with the Asian Development Bank. He's also been on the board of the State Bank of India and the Reserve Bank of India. Now, this shows the kind of background he brings into the NITI Aayog and how the NITI Aayog really is privileged to have someone of his background heading the NITI Aayog. So that is the introduction to Dr. Rajiv Kumar. He has a PhD in economics from the Lucknow University and a DPhil from the Oxford University. So with that background, thank you so much, sir, for joining us today. We are really delighted. And with this, may I invite you to launch the working paper. We'll first have a curtain screen moving out. And after that, I'll request all the panelists to show up the publication so that we can have a panel shot of everyone. So can we have the digital launch first? Now for the photograph, if we can just all hold it up. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So with this, I'll now invite Dr. Rajiv Kumar for his keynote address. So we're all eagerly looking forward to hearing you. Over to you, sir.
Good evening, everybody. Namaskar. And thank you, OP, for giving me this opportunity to launch this working paper and then to say a few words. My felicitations to WRI for doing this work, and I really commend you to do this because, as you said yourself, forests are essential for mitigating the impact of climate change. They are the carbon sinks that we need, and we need carbon sinks not just within reserved forests but also outside the forest. And therefore, this particular effort on the WRI's part is actually very welcome, very commendable, because this is something that we need to push, we need to promote, because there is still a huge amount of land available where such sort of outside the forests can be developed. And the tree outside forest was first estimated in 2019 and assessed to be 29.4 million hectares, which is about 8.94% of the total geographical area. But as you can well imagine, there's a huge scope for further expanding it. I dare say that we can surely double this if we try hard enough. And this is where WRI's work, which is sort of done in 16 national and 30 state level policies based on research on that in 6 states, Gujarat, Karnataka, Maharashtra, Odisha, Punjab, and Telangana, I think will help a lot because it lays down a roadmap. I mean, actually, I must further compliment WRI for a title of a working paper which I have not seen very often, which is that it makes no bones about the fact that it is providing not some theoretical insights or not some analysis, etc., but a roadmap for doing this forward. And we in NITI Aayog firmly believe that ideas are all very well. What is to be done, is very often known, but how is to be done, and in what time frame it is to be done, and what institutional agencies are to be involved, I think is something that we very often don't focus enough on. So therefore, this effort on part of the WRI is actually very welcome, and I'm sure, therefore, that once this is out and this is out in the public domain, people will pick it up, and other states will pick it up. Because again, here it's important to note that the action lies in the states. That's where it is. Delhi is all very well. We can do whatever we can to promote and push things along, but the rubber hits the road in the states. So therefore, my own request to WRI would be to connect with the vertical in NITI Aayog, which does environment and forests and also agriculture, and then work with them to take the message to particular states, maybe the 6 that you've chosen already, or maybe the others, and make sure that this work is grounded and is taken further. I think the other part of it is that we need to also connect with the urban local bodies, more than 4,000 of them. And I think that's the other major task to be done. And NITI Aayog's urban planning, urban vertical has been doing some significant work on improving the capacity, urban planning capacity in India. And they've gone out and they've met the state level principal secretaries, chief secretaries, municipal commissioners. Just yesterday, my colleague was in Ahmedabad meeting with the municipal commissioners there and from Vadodara and so on. But I think those are the bodies which will also need to play a very important role in taking this campaign of tree outside the forest forward. Because there is no reason for me to believe that we can't have, as in other countries that I've seen, small forests, outside or next to the cities or towns and so on, because they provide a very good, not just a carbon sink, but also a very good natural habitat for our own people, which they require and which they need. So I think that's the other part that we need to do. And we will try and work with you to take the message also to the PRIs, the Panchayati Raj institutions, because again, in the rural areas, there's a lot of scope, there's a huge amount of scope to take this work, because there's very large tracts of degraded land, which are available and which can all be rejuvenated with these trees. And once you do that, then actually you can help improve farmers' incomes as well, because it's not just therefore a climate change initiative, it is also a real initiative for improving the farmers' income. Because now, and thankfully, some of it is happening already, in the sense that I see when I go to my own farm in the Hapur district here, that large number of farmers are now adopting the practice of planting trees around the edges of their fields, and so, so which also act as windbreakers, plus also give them good income at the end of a few years when they can sell that off. So I think that all has to be encouraged. So let me merely say that this work will also support India's commitment that you mentioned, OP, already, that we made in COP26, but also in our own nationally determined contribution, the bond challenge, the land degradation neutrality target, and the SDGs. So all of them, this particular initiative can contribute to all of this, and I think this is therefore most commendable. I welcome this, and I look forward for NITI Aayog and WRI working together to take this, to make this a tangible reality and have tangible progress, so that we can, let's say, try and double the area of trees outside forests in the next 10 years or so. I think this can be done, and I think we should all be committed to it. So once more, congratulations and all the best going forward. Thank you very much. Namaskar.
Thank you very much, sir. I think those words are very encouraging to us. And this is our promise to you that we will come forward, work with the NITI Aayog and whatever your ambitions are. I think we've already been working with the NITI Aayog in a number of other areas, including electric mobility and all that. But this is another area we'll be delighted to pick up. We are also working with Mr. Rajeshwar Rao on the urban local bodies thing. I've met him quite a few times and we are working with him. We're also coming up with another capacity building program, which is really aimed at exactly what you said. How do you build capacities at the ground level for people to take the action up? We feel that the negotiations are over. The whole stage has now shifted away from the negotiating table to action on the ground. So precisely what you're saying, sir, we would love to scale up our work with the NITI Aayog and look forward to doing that. So with that, let me now request my colleague Mary to make a brief presentation on the paper itself. Mary, and just to introduce Mary, she was a manager with the WRI till very recently. She chose to take up her PhD work, and she's now moved to Toronto, where she's doing her PhD from the School of Geography and Planning, University of Toronto. We are missing her. We hope she comes back, but has been very kind in joining us today to make this presentation of this paper. Over to you, Mary.
Thanks, OP. I will just share my screen. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Today, I'm happy on behalf of my co-authors, Dr. Singh and Swati, I'm happy to present key findings from a research study on policy incentives, enabling conditions and barriers for scaling trees outside forests in India. I would like to begin with a brief context setting. Forestry and agriculture are the lifelines of nearly 700 million people living in rural areas. Agriculture, in particular, is one of the largest land uses supporting livelihoods of 70% of rural households. Indian farmers are overwhelmingly smallholders, operating less than 2 hectares of lands. However, agriculture lands are increasingly vulnerable to degradation, with estimates from ICAR showing at least 45% of cultivated areas are undergoing different forms of degradation. Given this context, the sustainable management of land becomes crucial, especially with regard to the way we grow food, protect and maintain forests, and plan use of our land resources. In terms of trees outside forests, they have immense biophysical and socioeconomic significance. Officially, trees outside of forests are considered to be all tree resources that occur outside the areas recorded as forests by the government. Estimates by the India State of the Forest Report 2019, which is the data that we've used in this working paper, identifies just over 29 million hectares under trees outside forests. Preliminary results from a systematic literature review that we conducted as part of another study shows that there are at least 40 types of trees outside forest systems in India, including agroforestry, block plantations, linear plantations, and urban forestry. Agroforestry emerges as the most significant type of TOF system in India. There are various estimates regarding to the extent of agroforestry, with one study estimating approximately 23 million hectares of agroforests. Trees outside of forests, especially agroforestry, offer manifold benefits. They improve productivity of land, strengthen rural livelihoods, enhance food security, enhance provisioning services, and create jobs, particularly for women and landless people. There is also increasing traction that agroforestry expansion can support in building a restoration economy in India and spur a just transition in the post-COVID recovery field by working with nature. TOF can help India support meeting its international commitments. These include the Bond Challenge and Land Degradation Neutrality Target, which is a combined 26 million hectares, and the nationally determined contribution to sequester 2.5 to 3 billion tons carbon dioxide equivalent by 2030. TOF can support achieving several of the sustainable development goals, including no poverty, zero hunger, climate action, and life on land. This decade of ecosystem restoration offers opportunity for India to develop long-term agroforestry roadmaps. There is a wealth of opportunity for agroforestry and TOF to meet India's carbon sequestration goals. WRI India's Restoration Opportunity Atlas shows that over 50 million hectares of rain-fed agricultural lands where agroforestry interventions can fulfill local needs. Integrating native trees in these areas can achieve a carbon sequestration of 900 million tons of above ground carbon in the next 20 to 40 years. Recognizing the potential of TOF, the Government of India has enacted several policies and schemes to promote these interventions. India became the first country in 2014 to adopt a national agroforestry policy. Other schemes include the National Mission for a Green India, the Sub-Mission on Agroforestry, Green Highways Mission, Nagar One, among others. These seek to improve tree cover outside of forest areas to fulfill the objectives of improving the environment and strengthening livelihoods. The implementation experience, however, has been uneven across states and outcomes often suboptimal. For instance, evaluation reports show that the Green India mission was able to achieve only 2.8% of its target and has been grossly underfunded. To better understand the issues with TOF policies in India, we conducted a research, which is presented in this working paper, where we seek to answer two key questions. What are the different types of policy incentives in national and state level policies and schemes for implementing and scaling TOF in the 6 states that we selected for the study? And what are the key enabling conditions for and barriers to achieving results at scale? For the purpose of this study, we use policies to refer to any act, regulation, notification, circular, or order. And by schemes, we refer to missions, schemes, and programs of both the national and state governments. I'll now speak a little bit about our methodology. We adopted a mixed methods approach for the research. This involved quantitative analysis of fund allocation, release, and utilization for TOF policies such as the Sub-Mission on Agroforestry and Bamboo Mission. We also conducted a literature review of policy documents, peer-reviewed literature, and select grey literature on the implementation experience. In total, we reviewed 16 national and 30 state-level policies and schemes. We conducted key informant interviews with 43 stakeholders. This included farmers, government officials, especially from the nodal agency for the Sub-Mission on Agroforestry, representatives from civil society organizations, research organizations, universities, and entrepreneurs. The 6 states that we selected were based on 3 criteria. First, we looked at the trend in fund allocation, release, and utilization in the submission on agroforestry, which emerged as a flagship mission for the promotion of agroforestry in the country and had fairly comparable data across the states. We looked at all the states that received allocation under the scheme and selected those that represent varied release and utilization of funds. Second, we looked at the extent of trees outside of forests in terms of area according to FSI 2019. Here we looked at states representing high, medium, and low extent. Finally, we looked at the presence of state-level headlining of flagship schemes. For instance, in Karnataka, we have the Krishi Aranya Protsaha Yojana. In Maharashtra, the Mission Plantation. In Telangana, the Telangana Ku Harita Haram. In Punjab, Green Punjab Mission, and so on. Using this criteria, as you can see in the previous slide, we selected 6 states: Gujarat, Karnataka, Maharashtra, Odisha, Punjab, and Telangana. On the incentives are powerful policy levers. While incentives on their own cannot achieve the objectives of TOF, they are key instruments that can be used to set up the right enabling conditions. From our study, we identified or delineated 7 types of monetary and 3 types of non-monetary incentives enshrined in the policies and schemes that we reviewed. We will delve into this shortly. The policies and schemes supported a variety of TOF systems. Agroforestry emerged as the most highly supported intervention, followed by linear plantations along canals, rivers, and roads, trees in urban areas, and home gardens. Notably, we observed that protection and maintenance of existing TOF systems and traditional agroforestry models did not feature in the policies or schemes. Among the stated objectives of the schemes and policies, expansion of tree cover in the state and improvement of livelihoods emerged as the key goals. This was followed by restoration of degraded lands, water conservation, benefit sharing, biodiversity, etc. Here we noted that the policies and schemes did not mention a landscape approach. In the absence of a landscape approach, the policies and schemes fall short to include diverse actors in the planning process, and it is difficult to plan for multiple benefits. We will now briefly look at the experience of incentives across the 6 states. Here is an overview of the availability of the policy incentives across the states. The tick marks indicate the availability of the incentives, crosses indicate absence, and NA for lack of data. Among the monetary benefits, all the states provided subsidies in the form of free or subsidized saplings, particularly through their flagship programs. The states had examples of providing support for land development, for instance, digging pits and trenches and planting seeds, through convergence with the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. The states provided support for infrastructure such as greenhouses and ponds through funding from the Rainfed Area Development Program and horticulture schemes. Performance-based incentives were also provided on all the states. This is a key feature of the submission on agroforestry, which provides 50% of the total plantation cost spread across 4 years based on the survival rate of samplings. Similar models form part of other flagship schemes as well, including the Bamboo Mission. The cash benefits range from INR 15.5 to INR 50 per sapling per annum. Among the grants, the National Bank of Agriculture and Rural Development's Tribal Development Fund, covering the WRI program, emerged as a key model. With its focus on small tribal farmers, the scheme showcases the multiple benefits that can be achieved through agroforestry. Other grants include the catalytic assistance for drought-prone areas announced by the 15th Finance Commission for select states, which can be used to support expansion of trees outside forests. The crop diversification program under the Rashtriya Krishi Vikas Yojana provided grants for agroforestry in Punjab. Credits, though provided by policies, were difficult to assess due to paucity of data. In Gujarat, the Forest Department provides credit-linked loans to tribal farmers for growing high-value tree crops. Credit-linked bank-ended subsidies is a key feature of the Bamboo Mission. However, it has been difficult to understand the experience with this incentive. Benefit sharing also emerged as a key feature of the National Biodiversity Act. The national and state biodiversity funds can be used to support agroforestry and other TOF systems. However, here too, due to paucity of data, we could not assess the experience of the incentive. Insurance for select horticulture trees such as oranges exist in Maharashtra and Karnataka. However, farmers indicated that the premium payments were not viable for them. Our literature review reveals that 3 companies provide tree insurance for agroforestry systems in India. However, this insurance did not emerge in the states that we studied. Minimum support price is available for mature dehusked coconuts. Though coconuts are a well-established commercial species, we included this incentive to highlight existing provisions that can be used to model incentives for a broad set of TOF produce. Among the non-monetary incentives, supply chain infrastructure emerged as a key one. It is provided to growers of horticulture species under the Mission for Integrated Development of Agriculture in the form of cold storage units. The Bamboo Mission supports supply chain by forming bamboo clusters in markets and providing support for bamboo artisans. In terms of regulatory incentives, all the states enacted relaxation in felling and transit of select farm-grown species. Capacity building emerged as a key incentive in the states. In addition to awareness and training workshops, innovative methods such as YouTube channels and WhatsApp groups are also being carried to support agroforestry farmers. We will now briefly look at the enabling conditions in the states that supported the effective implementation of policies and incentives. We identified 2 key buckets. First, the motivation among multiple actors to scale TOF and agroforestry. Political and bureaucratic will to expand tree cover, particularly goals of states like Maharashtra and Telangana to increase forest and tree cover to 33% of the total geographic area of the states, ensured concerted focus on scaling TOF. Such commitments also spurred the convergence of different sources of funds such as MGNREGS and PMKSY for implementing interventions. Here, however, it is important to highlight that some of these large-scale plantation schemes raise concerns. For instance, the focus on trees has sometimes been at the detriment of ecological and social planning principles. Monitoring through field visits and monitoring platforms such as the website of the Maharashtra Forest Department were also key for the success of interventions. In our interviews with farmers, they highlighted the belief in the benefits of agroforestry as a key reason to protect or shift to agroforestry. Farmers from Karnataka highlighted the importance of agroforestry in rain-fed regions for resilience. In Maharashtra, improvement of microclimates, soil health, erosion control, and use of trees as shelter beds were highlighted. In Odisha and Gujarat, farmers acknowledged the improvement of soil and water quality as key benefits of agroforestry. The second set of motivations are related to actors and networks. Decentralized implementation process which prioritized interaction between farmers and government agencies for planning agroforestry, particularly through selection of saplings and seeds, supported the success of interventions. Partnerships with NGOs and research organizations helped farmers in accessing incentives and funds, selecting appropriate models of species, implementing agroforestry, and connecting to markets. The private sector also plays an important role in the states analyzed by developing capacities and entering into buyback arrangement in certain instances. The states also had innovative TOF and agroforestry business models. In the image here, for instance, we see Black Bazaar Coffee, and we have Arshia today with us, who will speak more about their experience during the panel discussion. We will now briefly look at the barriers. As discussed earlier, the lack of emphasis on a landscape approach has led to tree planting interventions in ecologically inappropriate areas and in some cases against the wishes of local communities. Those states such as Punjab have tried to promote native species. The current incentives prioritize exotic commercial species over native species due to availability of more research and market linkages. This is a disadvantage for women and marginalized groups, such as tribal communities in particular, who are dependent on native multi-purpose trees for food, fuel wood, fodder, and non-timber forest produce. This is further exacerbated by poor tree tenure and resource rights, which disproportionately affect tenant farmers and women. Though regulatory incentives have eased felling and transit of farm-grown timber, There still exist challenges, especially in interstate transport of timber. Finally, there is poor enabling environment around existing incentives, such as lack of quality planting material, poor awareness of the policies and schemes, and lack of access to the incentives. In terms of economic and market barriers, there are very few established market linkages and value chains for agroforestry produce. Though many agroforestry models are developed, economic viability of turning these into action on the ground has been limited. Exploration of certification standards are still in nascent stage, and there is scope to extend certification beyond timber to other ecosystem services. Finally, there is a need to focus more research on native trees and traditional agroforestry models, particularly around their socio-economic significance to vulnerable groups. Research to scale examples that showcase the coming together of stakeholders is also important. There is also a need to increase the cadre of agroforestry extension workers. Based on our study, we suggest 3 key ways for moving forward: developing restoration strategies using a landscape approach, reorienting or shifting existing incentives to suit the local context, and strengthening the enabling environment around existing incentives. For scaling agroforestry, states can develop restoration strategies at different scales using a landscape approach. Such a strategy should focus on creating a shared understanding of restoration priorities and goals among the various actors. This will enable harmonizing efforts, funds, and objectives, and to unlock the full potential of agroforestry. Shifting or reorienting existing incentives to suit the local context can increase effectiveness. For instance, incentives can be tailored to support native trees and prioritize species and needs of women and marginalized groups. The scope of incentives such as minimum support price and supply chain infrastructure can be extended to include other commercial and native tree produce. Finally, the enabling environment of current incentives can be strengthened. For example, standards for quality control of nurseries and sapling production, which is being done by CAFRE, ICRAF, and TNAU, becomes important. Promoting innovative premium payment models for tree insurance can help farmers access insurance. There is a model being pioneered by TNU's Consortium of Agroforestry, which provides a roadmap for this. Development of certification standards, not only for timber, but other ecosystem services such as soil and water, is also key. Promoting partnerships using models such as NABARD's Wadi model can serve as an effective way of bringing together NGOs and farmers. And finally, fostering innovative agroforestry business models and entrepreneurs through incubator and accelerators can increase their participation. Thank you for attending and listening to this presentation. I would also take this moment to thank our partners and everyone we interviewed for this work and who supported us in this research. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary. That was brilliant. Thank you so much. Now, what I've been looking for is this very interesting panel discussion. I'm hoping to learn a lot from the discussion. So let me sort of introduce each of the panelists. We're really delighted that you've agreed to join us, but a quick introduction to each of the panelists. Let me start with Dr. Arshia Bose, who is the founder of a social and conservation enterprise called Black Bazaar Coffee. This is based in Bangalore, and it works with about 650 smallholder coffee producers in the Western Ghats. That's the biodiversity hotspot of India, to stabilize and secure livelihoods, as well as to strengthen biodiversity on coffee farms. I think a very, very interesting area that Arshia has picked up. She's passionate about participatory conservation approaches and design thinking. She holds a PhD in geography from the University of Cambridge in UK. She's an Acumen Fellow, Kinship Conservative Fellow, and National Geographic Explorer. She's a conservationist, a geographer, an action researcher, working in coffee landscapes in India. What more can you ask for? Thanks for joining us, Arshia. Delighted that you're here with us. Let me now introduce Joanna Dawson. She's involved with developing strategy, publications, and partnerships for the Balipada Foundation, and basically advancing the organization's vision and goals for the Eastern Himalayas. She brings an anthropological approach and experience to the development sector and marketing skills to the table. Now, this is a unique combination of anthropological skills and marketing skills coming together. I think very important for any developmental sector work. She's also involved in shaping the organization's thought leadership and developing original material for the foundation's communication strategy and publications. The current projects include policy research and an index for social and ecological indicators to enhance impact monitoring. Her prior experience has been in the development sector in India and in marketing and communications analysis and research, and she holds a master's degree in anthropology. I've rarely come across this kind of a combination, obviously something unique that she has brought to the table. Next, let me introduce Mr. Csr Murthy, who has been with NABARD for almost 34 years. That's a long spell, and he's been a technical specialist when he started off in horticulture in the plantation sector. Something very close to my heart because I spent about 2 years working with the plantation sector in the National Ministry of Commerce at one point of time, something very close to my heart. He's an alumnus of the Banaras Hindu University with a master's degree in agriculture, particularly in horticulture, and he's a certified associate of the Indian Institute of Banking and Finance. So again, a combination of agriculture and finance, yet another unique combination. He was trained in risk management at the Asian Institute of Management in the Philippines in Manila. He has contributed to the promotion of organic cultivation for the Government of India's programs. He has undertaken many consultancy assignments on the agri-value chain systems in India. He has worked in various regional offices of NABARD over this period of about 3.5 decades that he has been with them. He has worked with the UNIDO, the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, in the thematic area of cluster development programs, particularly applying the industrial cluster development principles to agro-processing in rural areas. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Murthy. Delighted to have you with us. Then we have Mr. A.M. Anaya, who is an officer of the Indian Forest Service. He was the additional principal chief conservator of forests. He's of course retired now, like me. He was a former, for about 40 years of experience that he has had in this field. He has an MSc degree in agronomy from the UAS Bangalore. He holds an educational background in law with a LLB from the National College of Law in Shimoga. So again, a forest and legal background. Again, unique combinations coming across disciplines. Very interesting to see this. He held various positions in the Karnataka state government, including that of the additional principal chief conservator of forests. He was the chief conservator of forests and administrator in charge of the Bhadra Command Area Development, Water Resources Department, amongst others. He has published articles in Yojana on management of wild forest fire, forest natural resources, Hasiru, and in nature-based on his wide experience, and has also received the Wildlife National Award in 2001 from the Sanctuary Asia and Junglees National Award 2002 in Calcutta. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Anaya. Finally, the session will be moderated by my colleague, Dr. Ruchika Singh, who heads our Sustainable Landscapes and Restoration work in WRI India. Ruchika is, she brings about 2 decades of extensive experience spread across grassroots level participatory programs, implementation to policy research, all of that range, strategy development, project management, all of that. Prior to joining us in WRI India, she has worked with the World Bank. She has worked with the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. She has worked with TERI and with the Foundation for Ecological Security. She holds a PhD in Development Studies from the Center for Development Research at the University of Bonn. She also holds master's degrees in politics from UMass Amherst and a master's in Development Studies from the International Institute of Social Studies. So she is an alumnus of the Xavier's Institute of Social Sciences and of the Delhi University. She is also a recipient of several fellowship awards, the NUFFIC Fellowship Award for Masters in Development Studies at the ISS. She has a Graduate Assistantship Award for Masters in Political Science at the UMass University in Amherst, the DAAD Doctoral Fellowship at ZEF, and Fieldwork Research Grant from Dr. Herman Iceland, PhD grant from the Fiat Panis Foundation. So this is really the star cast that we have for this panel discussion. I'm looking forward to the discussions, hoping to learn a lot from this, but over to you, Ruchika.
Thank you, OP, for very generous introductions for all the panelists. We are delighted to welcome all the panelists today at this launch event. And thank you, Marie, again, for a very insightful presentation, highlighting some of the key recommendations essentially around developing landscape level restoration strategies and plans. How do we think about reorienting or shifting incentives to protect, promote, and improve research on traditional trees outside forest systems, targeting the needs of women and marginalized groups? Very important to consider. And see, we think about planning very multi-purpose trees rather than just focus on exotics. And how do we have a more sort of nuanced and inclusive planning process, and the recommendations around in the enabling environment that are important. To begin with, just to start, we had Dr. Arunachalam also on the panel, who heads the Central Agroforestry Research Institute, and unfortunately he couldn't join us today because of some last minute emergency that happened, but we have some of the points from him, which I'll also kind of streamline within the discussion as we sort of move forward. But just to begin with, I think because Marie, you talked so much about agroforestry systems and specifically around issues around WRI, etc. I would like to first go to NABARD and ask Mr. Csr Murthy. NABARD has been a pioneer of agroforestry, particularly through extending the WRI model, and the NABARD in expanding WRI currently is also trying to tie in with a lot of new schemes such as JIVA for natural farming. So if you could reflect a bit on what are the key success factors for WRI that, and what can we learn from them if we have to kind of think about similar sort of programs at the, which can be mainstreamed. You have, if you could, have about 3 to 4 minutes, Mr. Murthy.
Yeah, thanks. Namaskaram to everyone. I'm delighted to be here with a very distinguished panelists. I would like to learn more from my distinguished panelists, and congratulations. And I read the report; it's outstanding. And thanks to you because you studied our model, and you brought us some recommendations. Certainly, being a developmental banker, we would take forward whatever recommendations to us. We will incorporate it in our programs. So, big congratulations to the entire team. Let me begin. Just I would like to. I don't want to confine myself to the WRI. I started my career with agroforestry model in Lucknow way back in late 80s. Began with my career with Wimco Poplar model. That was a famous model at that point of time. I don't think I've not seen such a model after that because of contractual issues. Second, one thing also we have done work which has not been captured over here. We have also experimented with combination of a loan plus a grant model with the KFW assistance. It is a quite successful model. We have done this kind of a models in Orissa project with the tribal farmers and other states as well. It has been quite successful. That is one. Third one is what you said that you captured it nicely in your document was the third model is the grant-based models. Thanks to all these models, we are indeed we are happy to be in this space. We have been recognized by you. We have documented it. With the kind of numbers we have, about 2.7 crore plantations cumulatively. Began with in the year 2005 and 6, and now the area is about 5.4 lakh acres. Every year it's going to be a constant ongoing program for us. About 60,000 acres or 70,000 acres. It's funded. We have got a unique dedicated fund with us. So the uniqueness is this. Our program is the design. It's all-encompassing, all the ingredients, women-centric, gender-sensitive. It talks about not only horticulture, forestry, livelihoods, then health, sanitation, then micro enterprises, SHGs, then value addition, so on and so forth. So all these things have been uniquely designed. All are in one design. That's the beauty of this design. That's why we could able to take it to that scale. Then another success is this, which we found is the selection of the area. That's most important. And agency who got the ability to a passion for working with the tribals. Then building community organization. This is the most non-negotiable value which we carry. Of course, that it implies a visioning kind of a thing. Then forward-backward linkages and convergence and strict monitoring. It's almost 5 to 6 years of program. A lot of money we are going to commit it. Now roughly 60,000 rupees per family. That's the kind of money which we go. So we do a lot of monitoring. Because of this, we could succeed. But on the downside part, now what people were talking, you also mentioned about wadi. Wadi means in horticulture, we would be rooted. Now, of course, this model requires over a period of time. Now we are also diversifying high-tech value agriculture, then post-services aspects, then FPOs we are going to overlay on our interventions. So a lot of diversity, when integrated farming system, fisheries. So we are now experimenting. We are going beyond this kind of a body model, that is which is a current line of thought. Another one is Jiva, what you pointed out, agroecological principles we are going to brought in. FAO 10 principles, that is the one thing which Jiva, we are going to pilot it in 11 states. That has been already been launched by none other than Dr. Rajiv Kumar ji. So this is the line of approach, our thought process on this entire our agroforestry system in NABARD. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Murthy. Very important point. I mean, I think how we think about different models when we talk about integrating trees within farming systems, and also with the current emphasis, and we've seen this in the union budget as well. There is a lot of focus on agroforestry, but also a lot of impetus on sustainable and regenerative agriculture or natural farming initiatives. So the impetus on new schemes definitely would be an important one to look at from that context. And I'd like to sort of, Dr. Arunachalam, in fact, had who's not with us, but he shared few of his sort of learnings for this group. He mentioned some of the in terms of scaling up priorities for agroforestry. He mentioned something similar in terms of, one was around periodic mapping of agroforestry areas. And I think you kind of hinted on that as well, Mr. Murthy, but also deregulation and removal and hindrance when it comes to policy issues. So looking at some of those aspects become important when one looks at it. The other question that sort of came up, which Dr. Arunachalam mentioned, was around how do we administer agroforestry at the district level? So thinking through some of those sort of logistical issues and nuances that come, and the incentives and institutional framework around that become important. And the last thing that I want to mention, which he mentioned as well, which I think Marie in her presentation talked a lot about submission on agroforestry. Given there is a call for support of agroforestry adopters in the union budget, how do we, the need to revamp the submission on agroforestry itself? And if the implementation of the submission is carried out differently in each state, so how does one look at some of those issues? Despite him not being here, I thought just to kind of, put some of these issues that he sort of had shared with us over email here as well. But switching gears a bit now, I'd like to go to Dr. Joanna Dawson. Joanna, I mean, there's at Balipara Foundation, you have a very interesting concept of naturenomics, and how do you balance nature and economy? And you've been sort of working on that while thinking about how do we think about multiple ecosystem services, but also, people's need. And trees outside forests, of course, has an immense significance in context of Northeastern India as well. Although we didn't look in this particular paper specifically at policy incentives around Northeast, but there are, of course, learnings that also are applicable for that region. And given we know there's already land use change sort of happening in the Northeast, and there are a lot of horticulture plantations, but then, of course, also now more focus on oil palm. I was curious to know if you could, talk a little bit about Balipara Foundation's experience on trees outside forest and agroforestry systems in the Northeast from a nature economic lens. What do you think are some of the best practices and challenges when we think about, scaling this up, and what resonated in a way from what you heard till now?
Thanks, Ruchika, and thanks for having me here. I just want to mention that I am not a PhD, I'm not a qualified doctor, I'm just plain Joanna Dawson. So so talking about our work, one of our key components of the work we do on the ground is agroforestry. And that is what we are scaling up across Assam, Meghalaya, and Nagaland, and now next few years across several other states. And based on our experience, I think what we find in terms of best practice is that the key is to actually just involve the farmers right from the start. Because especially when we're working with indigenous communities, a lot of these farmers, they have a lot of practice, a wealth of knowledge about the kind of crops that can be grown. They also have a wealth of knowledge about traditional crops and traditional trees that can be grown that have both medicinal and economic value on local markets. And once you work with them, you can actually identify crops and plants that can be planted. I mean, you can identify trees that can be included in these agroforestry systems that are actually native to the area, but also have a market. So they have that, so they're not just planting something that's good for the soil, but they're also earning from it, right? And key to that is also to bring in the science element and to essentially test the soil, to test the kind of water that is there. I think what we find that happens with farmers is that very often an organization or someone will come to them and say, we have money and we want you to plant, and we can offer you this market, so you plant these crops. And these crops may not be suited to the area. And so what happens is the farmers plant these crops and then they discover they have to use a lot more fertilizer, they have to use a lot more pesticides because the pests, they're not adapted to dealing with these local pests, right? And so then the soil degrades and then they enter this kind of negative cycle where they have to then keep on doing all of this all over again. But if you start working from the perspective of looking at what the local market already is, and you build on that, and you work with the perspective of what are the native trees that are grown in the area, what are the other native trees that could be added that maybe the farmers aren't growing right now, and what are the native trees the farmers themselves are identifying. I think those are the best practices that we found have really worked to create models that meet both the needs of the people, what they want, but also helps them economically. And then it also helps them build self-sufficiency. And that, I think, is the core goal for us, is for people to be able to build that initial self-sufficiency through the local markets before they think about accessing much broader markets. Because very often what happens in the Northeast especially is that there is very limited access to these kind of bigger markets in different cities, or even across the country, or even to international markets. And if you start growing something that cannot get to a market, then it doesn't benefit the people in the end. So if you start from the premise of looking at local markets, local trees, local what the local knowledge is, I think that is your ideal base for building on. And then you can, once you've strengthened that base, then you can look at expanding outwards, which is what we're trying to do now. We're at the stage where we can work with our farmers to say, okay, you're producing enough that we can build linkages with other firms to sell some of the produce that you have. So I think that is the perspective that we've been seeing right now. Yeah.
Thanks. I think the focus on how do you sort of think about local priorities and make sure that who is going to be responsible for protecting, growing these agroforests, right? And how do we, and the question of incentive and markets is an important one, which kind of is a good segue into my next question to Dr. Bose. In terms of Black Bazaar, is an innovative model, where you sort of developed looking at promoting ecological health of the landscape as well as well-being of the farmers. So could you share your experience of bringing together multiple farmers? I mean, what is Black Bazaar really about? And because just for the listeners here, and also, some of the challenges as an entrepreneur, what you see are when one is thinking about, restoring through initiatives like yours.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. Just to start off by saying that actually coffee is extremely unique. And coffee is unique because it brings together ecology, it brings together people's livelihoods, and it brings together the market. We think of coffee as a niche product, but of course it's not. India is the 6th largest grower of coffee, and 83% of coffee in India is grown by marginal and smallholder growers, many or most of whom are indigenous communities cultivating coffee on the edge of forest or actually within forest areas. And so even if you did a kind of global map of coffee, if you kind of overlaid where biodiversity hotspots are, where tropical rainforests are, it's very likely that you will also find coffee plantations. What's interesting about coffee, of course, in the context of the work that you're doing, is that we try and look at, so coffee is also one of those things that's intensifying extremely fast, particularly because of climate change. And scientific studies show that unless we kind of, start really thinking very seriously about mitigation and adaptation measures, it's likely that by 2050, we will no longer have coffee to the extent that we do now globally, but also perhaps the flavor of coffee will change significantly. So it really ties together the culinary sector, ecology, and livelihoods in that sense. I'm a geographer and an academic, and so I find myself running a business to be very unique and accidental, and I'm of course learning as we go along what really it means to sort of create a market for coffee in this way. So what's interesting is to kind of bring existing products from forest areas, from smallholder communities to the market, but it's another thing to kind of change what an existing product is that people are very familiar with, particularly in southern India. And the shift that we're trying to make is to say that actually you can have coffee from anywhere, but you can actually now look at getting a coffee or brewing a coffee that's coming from growers who are practicing biodiversity friendly farming practices. And so the other thing that we're trying to change and shift is to say, actually, it's not just about trees outside protected areas. It's not about trees outside forests. It's not about trees outside and on farmland. It's about whether actually there's biodiversity there as well. And can we look slightly more holistically at what restoring areas or creating refuges for biodiversity means, particularly endemic and endangered species, as you would find in the Western Ghats. What's beautiful with the communities that we work with is that there's already so much traditional ecological knowledge. There's already that foundation for wanting to cultivate coffee in a way that's biodiversity friendly, but often there isn't that external market support structure that allows it. The pressures are towards intensification. We don't have the kind of R&D to allow organic or regenerative ways of managing one's farm, of dealing with fungal infections, of dealing with pest outbreaks. We don't have the means to kind of allow people, even the infrastructure to process, to do the value addition, to do that kind of quality enrichment that allows them to compete at a global market level. This year, we've been lucky enough to be recognized by the Specialty Coffee Association as a finalist for the sustainability coffee category. And that really, I think, opens up that global platform, right? To say that coffee, good quality coffee needn't come only from very large landholders and large plantations. It can actually also be grown by a woman cultivating half an acre on the edge of a forest. And good quality coffee needn't also be that actually has damaging effects on the environment, but actually it can be something that really pulls together what local ecosystem conservation might be as the basis for how to cultivate coffee. So those, I think, are the kind of founding tenets of the way that we work. We are interesting because we also try to build a brand, and that means that there's a lot of significant storytelling involved. And so in this process, there's a decommodification of something that's a commodity for the past 200 years. So how do you take what everybody drinks every morning and actually tell a very different story about the origin, about the place, about the landscape? And that's interesting because we compete with the really large coffee companies. We want to compete with the really large coffee companies as well. And that's an exciting place for us to be as a small conservation and social enterprise based out of Bangalore.
Thanks, Asha. Couldn't have agreed with you more on, it's not just about trees, of course. How do we think about it from a larger ecosystem perspective and biodiversity and other sort of benefits that are important to look at? And how do we think about, I mean, another important question that a point you raised on in terms of thinking about value chains. How do we sort of, develop that? And a bit of what that Joanna was also sort of hinting at, eventually we need to think about markets, how these markets are developed. Some of these are important issues to look at when we kind of think about, we really need to think about trees outside forest expansion. It's whatever way, different sort of TOF system it might be. Which brings me to Mr. Anaya. I mean, from your perspective, I mean, and you come with a very diverse and rich sort of experience, last 40 years working on some of these issues. Farmers are the primary practitioners of trees outside forests. I mean, when we were sort of having interviews with a lot of farmers, we could see that there's immense insights on the benefits of agroforestry, but also challenges of accessing incentives and difficulty in integrating trees. I mean, we know there are issues around governance, tree tenure, and which I think Marie had also mentioned in her presentation. So based on your experience, what are the key actions that state agencies and other actors can take to support farmers in taking up agroforestry? You also practice, yourself. So, I mean, if you could reflect on that a bit. Thank you.
Thank you, distinguished panelists. I see only doctors here, Dr. OP, Dr. RS, Dr. JD, then Dr. AB and Dr. MD. Of course, myself and Csr Murthy are not doctorates. Anyway, thank you for this good opportunity. And for coffee thing, I will be coming later. Now, directly I will go to, I am from the organization called Institution of Agroforestry, Farmers and Technologists from Bangalore. Apart from that, I'm an actual cultivator of agroforestry species on my land. Okay. So, farmer, as a farmer, I need livelihood. Then the other parts is secondary for me. That is climate mitigation, carbon sequestration. It's all right. It's also important. As a farmer, income is important. So whatever species we recommend should be multi-cropping. That means the farmer should get income every month, quarter, and annually. So what I tried in my land is a combination of teak, Tectona grandis, planted 10 feet apart, and nuke, the drumstick, between the plants of teak in the row. In another plant, papaya between the teak trees. In between 2 rows of teak, we have grown horse gram, Dolichos biflorus, and in the trenches, chilies. So all these combinations used to give chilies after 2 months, green chilies, and up to 6 months, red chilies. Then papaya and drumstick started yielding from 8 months and up to 2 years. Up to 2 years. Afterwards, after 5th year, we can go for thinning in case of teak. We will get some pole crops. Then in this Melia dubia, what we call hebeu, we have mixed with drumstick, moringa, but that is not a good practice. After some few years, I can say after 6 months or 1 year, the hebeu, Melia, will suppress the drumstick and other species because it is a fast-growing species. So this multi-cropping or intercropping is very important. And choice of species. Sometimes they mix the species. For example, this Melia with the sandalwood. No, they will not go together. Even on the bud, This Tectona grandis and other species like coconut, they will not go. Either they have to plant on one side coconut, on other side teak. Okay, then the main problem here for the agroforestry or trees outside the forest is the interference of the representative of the people. They do not want forest. This Forest Rights Act has diluted the conservation of forest. Even there is a fight between Forest Conservation Act 1980 and this Forest Rights Act 2006. In Karnataka Assembly, day before yesterday, they have discussed the forest officers are villains. They are not allowing the people to leave. They are coming way in the air of livelihood. So, this representative of the people should be educated and motivated first that the environment is important than the economy and development. See, we have all suffered. They know, the politicians know about the COVID-19 and the shortage of oxygen, everything in the first phase of COVID. But we have not learned any lesson from these things. Okay, that is one part. And regarding the beautiful report, wonderful report, I have read it, you have presented, most of the points are there. That's why I am not repeating them. Only this in Karnataka, this Krushi Aranya Protsaha Yojana, we are giving 125 rupees. First year 35, second year 40, and the third year is 50. Totally 125 rupees per surviving plant. It's a good incentive, but it should be encouraged with the good planting material and local species, good species. Known genetic material should be brought by the forest department, and they should raise the appropriate and healthy seedlings and distributed either under raising seedlings for distribution or under KAPY. Then we do not have any credit or loan facilities, no insurances, and no minimum MSP, minimum support price. It is there in your report you have mentioned. It is there for horticulture crops, coconut or other crops, but not for our forest species, silviculture species. It should be there. Then only we can.
I think we've lost Mr. Anaya. Maybe there's some problems at his end. We'll work to get him back, but I think just being conscious of time, maybe we can move on. Forest Rights Act actually is quite exemplary and historic in terms of recognizing rights for people. And we definitely need to see how more can be done on that. I mean, that's one thing that I did want to mention. And going back to, just because it's conscious of time, I'm going to request everyone to maybe in a minute or 2 minutes, just very broadly, if you could talk about, and I'll come to you, Mr. Murthy first, very at a high level, key question and same question to all the panelists in terms of.
You would like to tell that I should stop it now? Are you giving a break? Dr. Ruchika Singh, should I stop for a moment?
Mr. Anaya, we had lost you actually. So that's why to continue the process, I thought we can come back to you later. We couldn't hear you. Yeah. Would it be okay? Anyways, we are closing soon. So I'm requesting all panelists for a 2 minute sort of a reflection on, if we have to move forward in terms of the key incentives that, what do you think are, 1 or 2 really big picture key incentives that need to be strengthened? I mean, there was a lot of discussions around, challenges, etc., that has been done. And maybe Mr. Murthy, I can, if we can start with you.
Yes, incentive more so for sustainability point of view, we are looking at the FPU model. That is the mode. So probably incentive structure to take care of all those capacity deficits, market issues, and everything would be taken care of it. So institutional mechanism is very important for us, so that our incentives, whatever is there, it has to be aligned. Thank you.
Joanna, what would be your thoughts on, I mean, if we have to think about, if we have to scale up agroforestry, what would be the key incentives that are definitely important to be considered? And, anything on value chain and linkages, if you would also like to reflect on that.
So I think the big thing that we see is that the incentives have to, I think, be focused around encouraging especially native crops and native species, and the incentives need to be directed specifically towards mechanisms that encourage farmers maybe to transition their existing fields where they're planting a single crop to agroforestry, or to a system where they're planting multiple crops side by side that complement each other and actually enrich the soil. And I think we have to be cautious also on one side that the incentives don't actually encourage destruction of forests, and they don't encourage the kind of degradation of the existing natural ecosystems as well. And of course, I think market linkages is a big issue. It's a big problem. I think if on one side we focus on building the farmer capacity to just be able to grow trees on their land that can be sold on a local market, that's a good first step. But on a broader level, we need to maybe be looking at building networks with I think FMCG companies, and especially I think there's a lot of interest from a lot of international companies in actually being able to source from a single source, and to be able to say that this has a certain guarantee, and it has certain quality, and it has certain social standards as well to it, right? So I think those are opportunities we should be making a lot more use of, and we should be linking with, especially as interest is growing internationally in this. And you have initiatives like the Sustainable Markets Initiative and the Circular Bioeconomy Alliance, which we are a part of. And there are a lot of companies coming in through that who are looking for opportunities. And I think that is a place where we can actually move in as a country with a very strong agricultural sector.
Thanks, Joanna. So focusing on sort of alliances and also looking at which can be developed of, further strengthens is an important one to look at. So Arshia, I think back to you on terms of, if we have to think about moving forward, what would be the key incentives that could be strengthened, so that it actually leads to, they reach farmers and practitioners from your perspective?
In my experience, I find that single or sort of linear structure of incentives don't work, particularly when they are sort of singular sort of financial incentives, like the payments for ecosystem models or the RED programs or those kinds of things. I think when they are purely financial, purely market-based, they have limited transformation potential. Where we've really approached the question of incentives is to actually look at to look more holistically at the issue of quality. And so with the example of coffee, for us, quality, high quality coffee is not just coffee that tastes good, but it's actually also that's grown with certain environmental and social standards. And when we start thinking, I think, holistically about coffee, I think the kind of incentive measures and the possibilities are far more broader. They include small infrastructure development. They include access to microfinance and savings so that communities themselves can invest in their own improvement of farm processes and so on. So I think we need to look a little bit broader at incentives beyond just financial incentives.
So what would that be? I mean, would it be also in terms of thinking technical ones, capacities? I mean, looking at some of those issues.
So, and that's so, kind of strengthening existing farming practices that actually do keep in mind local ecosystems. I think actually there's a lot of incentives to intensify, to shift from sustainable to unsustainable agriculture. There's not necessarily different kind of departments or different sort of state, non-state agencies speaking to each other on this. So there needs to be like a lot more, I think, coherence in that approach, in the kind of communication to smallholder growers. I think people are also extremely confused about what is the right process, about taking one pesticide, about changing that. So I think there's a lot of confusing information. Perhaps that needs to be kind of, really streamlined to in favor of much more sustainable practices, particularly, and I think there's a huge role for the state there as well to be far more proactive on that. Including, yes, looking more broadly at value addition, looking more broadly at how people can actually compete. Not just, let's say that their process of cultivation is really far more ecologically sound than much larger estates, much larger plantations, much larger agriculturists, but can they also therefore compete on their product as well? Because I think it's in, particularly when we think of export, particularly when we think of really competing in a market, the unilateral kind of feedback we get is that the process is wonderful. The farmers are really practicing extremely sustainable practices, but the processing of the coffee isn't great, or the processing of that produce isn't great. So I think we need to look at both.
So much more focus on the processing value chain and that livelihood side, because eventually that's also the incentive that, farmers also need to kind of grow trees, right? And very well taken. I'm going to come to Mr. Anaya. Mr. Anaya, just last 2 minutes, quick thoughts on terms of, what is one or two important way or incentives that are actually needed to reach to farmers and practitioners if we have to scale agroforestry and trees outside forest systems?
So in Karnataka, we are having Karnataka Preservation of Trees Act. It has exempted 42 species from transit pass. The incentive is they should give exemption for felling, transit, and sawing for all the trees grown on farmland. If they give this incentive, really farmers will cultivate in a better way all the species. See, in Kerala, the Kerala Promotion of Trees Growth in Non-Forest Area Act is there. It is very simple. That may be followed in other parts of the country. That is one thing. And regarding, we had sufficient coffee. This coffee cultivation in Western Ghats, Chikmagalur and other area, has really, those who have encroached the forest land, they have really destroyed the forest. Even the cases were gone up to Supreme Court in writ petition 202 for 95, what is called the Godavarman case. So wherever they grow coffee, yes, it is a very good land for agroforestry species like silver oak and others. They should not allowed to enter the forest areas. When 2 minutes over, please caution me. I think these are all the few points. Simplify the sandalwood procedure for farmers. Okay. Other points were covered in the report. Thank you for the time given to me.
Thank you, Mr. Anaya. In terms of also pointing out some of the key incentives that you would look at. We are running out of time, and I think what we're going to do is we're going to respond to the questions over email, and we've noted all of these questions, but I'm going to hand it back to Dr. O.P. Agarwal for his closing remarks now.
Thanks very much, Ruchika. I think fascinating discussion. A lot of it, though I'm not an expert on this topic, a lot of it I could relate to very nicely. One, I was really shocked that there may be a day when we won't have coffee. This is coming from Dr. Bose. I hope that doesn't happen. But I quite recognize, relate to what you said about, till almost 1992, 93, all coffee that was produced had to necessarily be sold to the coffee board, because it was felt that small growers will not be able to sort of compete with the big ones. And that's why it was mandated that all coffee must only be sold to the coffee board. Now, in that kind of a situation, someone who follows good process, good practices, comes up with better quality, really is not getting that extra price for that quality. And there was no incentive to really come up with good quality. If I remember right, in 92, 93, what was called the Coffee Marketing and Control Order was amended to allow coffee to be sold, even by individual growers. And to my surprise, when I tried to find out, at that time I was in the Commerce Ministry, why did it ever get to the coffee board? Why did the coffee board ever be set up? And to my horror, I found that during the Second World War, they didn't want coffee to not be available to the troops fighting the war. So to ensure that coffee is available for the troops, way back in the 1940s, they had introduced this coffee control measure. And it took 50 years before that was removed. And that was the 1991 liberalization that happened that really gave the incentive for this. But fascinating discussions. Similarly, Joanna talking about, be local, understand local. The farmers know better than you. I think that was fascinating again to me. But really an education for me. Thank you everyone for this very rich discussion. We look forward to remaining in touch with you, helping us to guide our work as we move ahead. We are very keen on, as Dr. Rajiv Kumar said, talking a lot more about the how than just the what. So with that, once again, thank you very much. Really delighted that you could have joined us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Yeah.